Oh, you're kidding me. What the heck?
Yeah, it says live on the thing now.
Oh, yeah. Yay. Okay.
Oh, Buzzy, that's me.
Just double check. Okay, we are live.
Okay, sweet as. Let me just share this now. Share now, shared, sweet. Okay, kia ora everyone. Sorry that we've started a bit late here today. There was, the storm and all that, few problems getting it all up and running. But we're here now and, very big lineup, but I'll get into it. Kia ora, g'day, hello and welcome. I am young Matt, formerly known as Matthew Casey. I'm the host of a podcast called The Young Matt Show, which is basically about, casual conversations trying to get the youth of Aotearoa, New Zealand engaged in politics. I'm a third-year BA student at Victoria University of Wellington, as well as currently working for Salient, the student magazine at Vic.
And kia ora koutou, my name is Tam. I'm one of the co-hosts for the Aotearoa Town Hall. I saw most of you last night, and I am a Wellington City Councillor and former student president for Victoria University of Wellington. So I'm really stoked to be hosting this this kōrero tonight with my co-host, Young Matt. I've been on his podcast a few times now and thought it'd be the perfect co-host for this kaupapa tonight, which is all about our tauira, or all about our students. So yeah, again, apologies for being a bit late on this. We had a few technical glitches, but we're here now. We are live streaming on the Aotearoa Town Hall Facebook page. Please feel free to leave any questions, any kōrero in the comments, and this video will be available for later viewing right here on the Facebook page, as well as on YouTube as well.
Okay, so I'm very fortunate to be co-hosting this alongside Tam. I got to shout out all the work that she's done actually setting up these town halls, as well as, being full-time as a counsellor. So, big love to that. And as we've seen over the past few months, COVID-19 is affecting students far greater than expected. With the whole halls of residence situation, universities trying to charge students for rooms that they were previously kicked out of, and even just the chaos that is involuntarily studying at home. Students have lost their jobs before the wage subsidy kicked in, so that's actually been quite a big loss for a lot of students who relied on that even part-time work to get by. And just as a whole, a lot of students have lost the normality in their lives. I do acknowledge that there has been a great amount of money given from the New Zealand government to the people of New Zealand to help with the financial effects that's going on. But it's also quite interesting for students that it hasn't really been the case. The way the government have helped the students so far is what they've called the Start, and that is their domestic tertiary package, offering an extra $1,000 accessible for the student loan course-related costs. But in reality, that's just another $1,000 of debt available to students, which, as a student myself, does not sound that exciting or even that helpful, if I'm quite honest. And so, as a lot of people have said before me, this is actually something I find quite interesting, is that fundamentally students are one of the only parts of our society which we expect to borrow money to get by. And so tonight we are talking about the case for a universal education income. We have a great panel here tonight to discuss this, and I'll be very frank, I'm beyond excited to hear what all of these guests have to say.
So before we launch into our quickfire questions, as we do every time at the Aotearoa Town Hall, I just want to mihi to our excellent panellists that we have here tonight, and just wanted to give a bit of a brief introduction to the who is who that we have around the theoretical table tonight. So we have the president of the New Zealand Union of Students Associations. This is essentially the body representing all of our student associations across the motu, whether it's for a university, for a polytechnic, and and other training providers. Izzy is the person that represents that collective voice. So we have Isabella Lenihan-Ikin here representing all of our tertiary students tonight. Kia ora, Izzy.
Kia ora, Tam. Thank you. Thanks to you and Matt for hosting. This is really awesome.
All good. And we also have Mr. Nohorua Parata, who is the Tumuaki of Te Mana Ākonga. Now that is again, at a national level, that is the representative body for all of our Māori student associations across the country. Tēnā koe noho, where are you calling in from?
Tēnā koe, Tam. Yeah, we're calling in here from Hastings. A nice kind of cold evening here tonight, not so much rain, but very cold tonight. But just want to give a big mihi to yourself and Matt for inviting us here tonight. Very honoured to be here. So, and also just a big mihi to Mosey too, who's the other tumuaki of Te Mana Ākonga too. So just want to acknowledge here too. So kia ora.
Yes, a big shout out to Mamairoa, e te whanaunga, kia ora. Hope you are watching from home right now, and I'm sure Noho will do you and our Tauira Māori very proud with your guys' whakaaro. And as well as keeping in tune with the national representation, we have the president of Tauira Pasifika, which is the representative voice for our Pasifika students at tertiary institutions here in Aotearoa. Kia ora, Ali.
Oi, Māori, talofa lava, hello, get warm Pacific greetings, Tam. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you, Ali. You look nice and warm and snug.
Of course.
Next up, we have Sandra Gray. Now, Sandra is a formidable force in the tertiary sector. She is the National Secretary for the Tertiary Education Union. That is the union that supports our lecturers, our teachers, and all of the staff employed in the tertiary sector. Tēnā koe, Sandra.
Kia ora, and wonderful to join you all. It's a chilly Wellington night, but a fantastic warm topic. And greetings from the 10,000 staff who, are out there every day supporting students, but really keen to get behind you in this mahi.
Oh, kia ora, Sandra, thank you. And finally, calling in from down south, where it's probably very cold as it is here in Wellington at the moment, we have Sylvia Nissen. Now, Sylvia is a lecturer at the University of Canterbury. She's Lincoln University. That always happens to me. Aroha mai, Lincoln University, the other university in Christchurch, aroha mai. And as the author of 2 incredible books on the subject of student political activism, student debt and political participation, and the new BWB text, Student Political Action in New Zealand. Aroha mai, sorry, kia ora, Sylvia.
Kia ora, and I'm just delighted to be part of this kōrero tonight.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you all for joining us who have tuned in at home. Awesome to be with you, and thank you for tuning in to support the kaupapa and to support your friends and whānau that are on this town hall tonight. So for everybody watching at home, there's a way that you can support this kaupapa, and it will help you to directly influence the government to get behind a universal education income. So there is a live petition on the Action Station website that you can go in and sign and to show your support. So I'm going to be posting this in the comments right now, and young Matt is going to get underway with our quickfire question. So kia ora koutou, looking forward to spending the evening with you all.
Okay, to start us off, we've got the quickfire questions. This is to help you understand, you the viewer, understand more about who we're talking to and kind of grasp of what the whole thing we're talking about here tonight. So first question is for Izzy, and I think this is quite a helpful one. Quickfire question coming through. What is a universal education income?
Cool, thanks, Matt. I can talk for years about this, but I'll try and be really quick fire. So essentially, a universal education income is a refresh of a more familiar name that people might know, which is the universal student allowance. Essentially, I'll break universal education income down into its 3 parts. So firstly, universal. So this means that it would be available to all part-time and full-time domestic students who are studying in Aotearoa, both at undergraduate level and at postgraduate level. This would mean that the 2 current systems for student support, which are the current student allowance and the current living costs, are removed to make way for this new kind of model of student support. It would remove the age requirement so that, people under the age of 40 are the only people that are able to access the current student student allowance. It would remove the means testing requirements, which are income testing both for ourselves and for our parents until we're age 24. It would remove the number of weeks that a student allowance is available to us, which is currently 200 weeks, because education doesn't have a cap, right? Education is something that we should always have the opportunity to access throughout our lives. Just really want to note, though, that a universal education income doesn't necessarily mean that it's universal in amount. So universal in access, and that all students are able to access, but really want to acknowledge that there are people within our community who, due to the fact that they have disabilities or have children, or for various reasons, they will need more income from the government in order to be supported week to week. So there'll be different and this is similar to the Action Station Universal Basic Income. There'll be different levels of income, and it's not going to remove the welfare system. This is a student support, so people will still be able to access those additional means of income to top up their weekly amount. Education, this is about treating education as a public good, as a right, not a privilege that all people in Aotearoa should be able to access. Education's like a passport, right? And I can definitely speak to this from my own perspective. University has, my study at university has transported me to worlds that I wouldn't have been able to access without it. So it needs to be treated as that right that all citizens have access to, that we can use to navigate our way through this world. Education also doesn't just happen within the university sector. Really want to emphasise that education happens in our wānanga, in our polytechs, in our ITOs, in our PTE. So across the spectrum of tertiary education, it's not just for university students, which sometimes politicians can get a bit hung up about. The third part is income, right? So currently, as young Matt said, students are the only group in our society that have the expectation put on them by the government to borrow to live. So borrow to pay for power, borrow to pay for weekly expenses. An income provided by the government would be at an amount where students can afford those universal, or those weekly expenses that we, as a person living in our society have to face each week. So it would be enough to pay for them, and it also would be a constant weekly amount that would come through. It also counteracts the narrative that currently is pervasive in our society, that students have to endure this period of transient poverty and they pop out the end of it with this degree and this like real mean job that pays heaps, and we can like whack off our student loan really quickly. That narrative is false, and actually it's taking years for students to pay back the loans, often which are up to 50% of the amount of money that they've had to borrow in order to live. So this would substantially reduce the amount of debt they've got, and also would mean that students do not have to endure poverty, which is both a barrier to people continuing to study, but is a barrier to people entering into study as well. So kind of, if that's kind of hopefully a bit of a quick fire overview of what a universal education income is.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Something I picked up in there that, thank you, that was really well said. Something I did pick up in there that I didn't fully understand was you said the wage thing, like it's universal. Does that mean that it's universal the amount everyone gets, or is it universal that everyone gets one?
Yeah, this is a really important nuance, especially in the universal basic income discussions, which is like the kind of bigger discussion that's being had at the moment. So essentially, a universal student allowance, so probably a useful way to describe this is in relation to what Canada has recently put in relation to their student benefit. So they have given $1,500 to every student every month. So students get a $1,500 payment every month. For students that have children, dependents, or students with disabilities or chronic illness, they get between $750 and $2,000 a month, recognizing that the costs that they face each week are higher. So this is a similar model that we're opting for. So everyone gets a base payment, but there'll be an additional payment available to students who require and need more income because of dependence or their own personal situation.
Okay, thank you. Cheers for that. And so we're moving on to Ali, and this is I'll let you interpret this one. What does a current tertiary student in 2020 look like?
Thanks for the question, young Matt. Obviously, when we think of tertiary education and when we think of students, there's this common myth that the public seem to think that students are young, fresh out of high school kids at universities, whereas you neglect the other parts of the tertiary sector who make us who we are in this country and so forth. But tertiary education as a whole is more than just university. It's also the polytechnics, the wānanga, the industry training organisations, the private training establishments, adult community education, and also our workplace learning providers as well. So, and there's that common assumption that students are just young and fresh out of high school, and as student leaders we need to break that down to actually paint a real picture of what tertiary students in New Zealand looks like. And I saw an article the other day, the mayor down in Dunedin, Aaron Hawkins, talk about that students are people, their mothers, fathers, grandparents and cousins and so forth, and again, they're not young people, they're also some of the elderly people who are chilling at home wanting to upskill and so forth. And like, a prime example for the demographics is you look at EIT, a large chunk of their cohort students are mature students and all have families and so forth. So that's something that we need to do as a whole country, really, to really put our glasses on properly and see that tertiary students aren't just young people anymore. It's bigger than that. And unfortunately, there's these common assumptions that we continue to try to break down. And like as he said, this is not just for universities, what we're talking about tonight. It's for the whole tertiary sector as a whole. So to get to your point, answer your question, students are just people. So yeah. Thank
you for that, Ali. Yeah, it was because that's pretty much, everyone has these preconceived ideas of what students are, and it's there's I don't even want to explain the stereotypes, but it's pretty straightforward, fresh out of high school kids.
Yeah,
so
it's sad it's that way. Like, I remember with Tam and other student leaders at Vic, we went campaign for some stuff, went to the council, and they just said, oh, extra money for you guys to spend it on booze. But we're like, hey, when that's a little portion of students. Heaps of us have kids and have families to look after, and it's something we're going to have to keep drilling day in, day out. So this is just one opportunity to talk about what a tertiary student 22 looks like, but we need everyone else to really hone in and believe that students are just people too.
Hara, Ali, and just quickly on that point, it's interesting how that common stereotype that there is for students is an argument frequently used to justify the poverty that a lot of people are living in. So thank you for your comments on that. Sorry, just thought I'd add that in there.
Definitely. I can't remember. I think I saw it on maybe one of Chloe Sawbrook's live streams, basically saying that poverty shouldn't be a rite of passage throughout, tertiary education. And yeah, exactly. So we'll move on to Sandra, and this is something I'm quite curious. In your role, you'll hopefully be able to give us a good answer to this one. How are lecturers finding teaching in a COVID-19 lockdown world?
Look, this is a really tough moment in time because essentially teaching and learning something you do together, and there's the interaction, and we're trying to use these spaces to interact with the 260,000 learners across New Zealand. It ain't easy, it's not perfect, and it does lack some of the heart that goes into the tertiary education sector. So staff overall, we've got around 30,000 people working across the country to keep tertiary education ticking along. They're working from, their kitchen tables, their garages, their, like me, half of their bedroom because they have no other space to work in. And they are really struggling. But what they're struggling with for many of them is they don't feel like they're giving you as students enough. They feel like you're missing out. They feel like they're not doing a good job. And then added to that, they think that their bosses are going to fire them for not doing a very good job. So there is a real tension out there. We're trying very hard. And I guess the distinction is there are actually some people who do online teaching and learning all the time. Those people are probably going okay because that's how they've set up their courses. That's how they've set up their training. And probably those staff and those students are just doing what they normally do. For the rest of us, we're doing a thing that we're now calling emergency remote teaching. You know, we weren't planning to teach everyone online. We weren't planning to interact online to support students, to give them the guidance they need, to help them find the books they need, to help them find the resources they need, but it's what we're doing. And it's not satisfactory, but it's all we can do at this moment. I guess the thing is, I think we all need to give both the learners and the staff in the sector a little bit of slack and say, if it doesn't work out perfect, that's okay. You know, sometimes we have to roll with the punches, but I think it does speak to what we need to do next, which is we need to really use this moment to change tertiary education forever.
Absolutely, and those are some powerful statements, Sandra, and I like the way that you've drawn that out, because I know a lot of students have been genuinely distressed about the conditions that, you know, themselves, but also their lecturers and their teachers are going through right now. There's definitely a united bond there. So I'm hoping that everyone can work together and get somewhere, knowing that there's strong unions like yourself and the student representatives here. I'm hopeful for that. Now, Noho, your whole whānau's online. I don't know if you're watching the comments, but heaps of fans out there for you tonight, brother. So it's now your time to shine. And my partai for you, my question for you is around what have the impacts of COVID-19 and its related lockdown and all of that, what kind of an experience has that meant for Māori students, our tauira Māori across the motu?
Yeah, tēnā koe te. Ka te rā kia tika ki tuku mi ka koutou. Nei rā te rō rāhiri o Ngāti Ka Ngunu Rongo Whakata, Ngāti Rua Nui, me Ngāti Tua Hoki. Ka rere ngā tai o mi ka koutou tēnei wā. Yeah, thank you for having me again, Tam and young Matt. Yeah, I guess just to answer that question, I want to build a bit of a context. So elaborate on what Ali talked about, and he talked about the diversity within the tertiary sector. But within that, you know, within Māori tertiary students, there's also diversity there. So to kind of address these impacts, we've kind of just narrowed them down to three real key common things between our rōpus and between our Māori students across the board. So for example, so ITP and wānanga tend to be mature students, mature learners, more likely to work part-time and be parents or caregivers, compared to like what Ali said about the university students tend to be fresh out of high school leavers. So just addressing those diversity. So, but yeah, so one key impact that's we've noticed through and recognised at with Māori tertiary students is the finances. So obviously finance being a huge burden on our Māori students, losing income, losing part-time jobs, full-time jobs, can't pay rent, can't pay bills, can't pay for the weekly necessities to get by every week. So that's a big issue, and so what we've recognised that our rōpus are doing, for example, we've had our rōpus take their own initiatives to kind of, in a way, support their students. And so some rōpus have created food parcels to deliver to their Māori students out of their own pockets, out of their own funding that they get. So those are some of the initiatives. Another issue too is mental health, which again, I know is a later question I'm going to talk about, but I thought I could address it now. And the issue with mental health is that obviously with the burden of finances, the burden of this kind of anxiety around the uncertainties, Māori students being left out of their governance space, around the decision-making tables. A lot of our Māori student leaders have been left out of those discussions. So therefore that creates uncertainties, and there's inconsistencies across the board, across the tertiary sector, in terms of their response to COVID-19, and therefore leaving our Māori students in a position where they're having to use their resources around them to adapt to what the response is from the university. So yeah, that's another key one. So mental health, and I guess the solution to that, what our rōpus have been doing, again, I'm just using examples from our rōpu. Some of them have created online, or have fostered online connections, virtual connections with their tauira, as I'm sure as a lot of other students have been trying to connect via Zoom and stuff. So that's a key thing there is connectivity, I guess, and trying to build that relationship via online, and making spaces like, you know, whether it's running quiz nights, whether it's having waiata karakia sessions with their rōpū, just that constant connection, that kind of, you know, we can't be in a space to kind of chit chat and stuff like that. And so using your own initiatives with the resources that you have to create those sort of spaces to me, just shows the initiatives of our young Māori leaders. And lastly, the third one that I just quickly want to touch on is just the accessibility. So as we would have known, seen the Minister Hipkins' announcement around the 20 million funding for online learning. So that's a really positive step. It's really good. Is it what we, you know, is it good enough? Not really. We need more whānau, and that's a clear point that we're trying to get across today. Although we're thankful for that for the government's initiatives, you know, we're kind of taking this time to really create momentum with this. So that's just some of the key things. So yeah, sorry, accessibility is another thing, making sure that our students have devices. A lot of them don't have that connectivity. So whether it's devices, Wi-Fi, a lot of reasons, a lot of a variety of reasons. But yeah, I guess that's, if I could just sum them up, I'm just trying to make it quick as possible, but those are key 3 issues that we've recognised with our Māori students: finances, mental health and wellbeing, and accessibility. Kia ora.
Can I just
Thank you,
support
brother.
something?
Oh, sorry, no, you go,
Can I
Sandra.
just support something that Noah said, which I think is really crucial here? And this proves that there are lots of things we know as staff and students that other people don't know about what we need. And I just want to reinforce and say thank you, Noah, for saying, you know, they need to start involving us in decisions from the government level through to our institutions. It is time that they got us around the table, because we could get better solutions if we were right there.
Yeah, and I just want to comment. I think Dr. Ganesh Nana, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I'm so sorry. And Sir Peter Gluckman, their comments around the impacts that Māori have had on their communities, and recognising that if they were involved at those decision-making tables early, you know, I think, you know, we'd be in a different place. But that's just my theory, and that's my comments. But yeah, kia ora. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Tim.
All good, bro. Thank you for that, and really just awesome kōrero, and it's showing in the comments as well. So thank you for that, bro. And for our final quickfire question, over to you, Sylvia. So I wanted to ask, so a lot of your books touch on the political participation and students' involvement in that. And I just wanted to know how you felt students have responded politically to the whole COVID situation.
Yeah, kia ora. I'm going to sound like someone from Christchurch for a moment, but it really is in emergencies when you see a lot of those kind of underlying dynamics really come to the fore. And we saw that 10 years ago in Christchurch, and we're seeing it again now. And I think that's really the case in student politics. So on the one hand, like, despite all the physical distancing, we've seen students' willingness to engage collectively. So whether that's organising food parcels or childcare, or all that wider care work that Noho was just speaking to. But then that's also framed by students' underlying economic situation. So it's a really tough time for students. And it's partly because of the huge disruption to their study. But it's also because of that existing economic precarity that has tipped over into financial hardship. And so despite those situations, we're still seeing a lot of collective work in this space. So whether that's the rent strikes against hostel accommodation during this time, but also all the stuff being done, like Noho was highlighting, around digging into the back pocket of that already limited resource. So it's kind of a bit of both coming through, and I'm looking forward to exploring it more.
Thank you there, Sylvia. And I'd also just like to say thank you to everyone for sharing there. I noticed I was just nodding my head quite a lot of the time. So I'm very happy, you know, we've got a great panel here tonight. I just got to make sure everyone knows that if you want to, there is a petition to the government to implement a universal education income. And you can find that in the pinned comments on the live stream, and you can find it on the NZ It's on our Action Station website, and pretty much if you wish to, go hard and sign it. So next we've got the more media questions coming through, and I'd like to let the panelists know with these more hearty questions, you're more than welcome to chime in at the end if there's anything you wish to add. And without further ado, I'd like to move on towards back to Sylvia actually. What have been the intergenerational impacts of the education reform? The last 30 years has seen an erosion of government support for students. What have been the impacts of these changes to students?
Yeah, big question, and I look forward to hearing some of what the other panelists have to say, but certainly the one thing I'd like to highlight is the biggest change, I would say, is just unprecedented levels of student debt. And a lot of our public discourse, when you hear it in the media and stuff, is all insisting that students are fine, students are okay, they can have more and more debt, they'll be all right. But I think there's two things you really have to bear in mind when we're talking about student debt in New Zealand. One of them is that it's been a gradual ramp up rather than a sharp jump. So whereas countries overseas like the UK, they had these big student debt protests, that's because it went through a bit of a sharp jump. Whereas our changes, because it has been gradual, a lot of them have passed under the radar, but they're still there. And so we've passed that $16 billion student debt mark. And a lot of the graduates who will be getting their bachelor's degree at a university, for example, will now be on average having loans of around $32,000. So we've seen this big ramp up over time. The other thing, which is picking up on some of the earlier points, is that there's a lot of shame and stigma involved with debt. And so when things go wrong, students tend to individually blame themselves, even though debt is very much a collective issue. And so prior to COVID, there was lots of signs that students were fine, so weren't okay. So my work has mostly looked at the effects of debt on students during study, and one of the really big impacts that I saw was the inequality it creates among students in terms of those who are able to fully engage in study and those who aren't. And so that's both in terms of their academic education, so actually kind of why they're there, but also the wider social and political engagement. So some students are able to fully participate, and that's usually by racking up really big loans, but others aren't because they're working really long hours and doing their best to make ends meet. So that was already there pre-COVID, and now we're seeing those kind of underlying cracks really being exposed, and where we're seeing all these issues with the reliance on part-time and full-time employment really come to the fore. But yeah, interested to hear what other people think in relation to this question, because it's a really important one.
Can I just jump in and say, because I do feel like, the resident old person about to say something, but I had a student loan when I left university. So I'm 50 now. So this is how long we've been suffering as students and as staff in the sector. I had a $47,000 debt when I became a lecturer at Victoria University. It's horrid. It's really horrid. If you've not been through it, you just don't understand. I couldn't look at my student loan statements. They're probably still in my parents' house, by the way. They're probably still sitting in a drawer there because I couldn't bear to open them because I would have stopped studying and I would have stopped being involved. And it took me 8 years, even on a lecturer's salary with no interest, to get rid of it. So this is multi-generational now, and it is shocking that we still think it's acceptable to make students borrow money to be involved in something that benefits everybody in New Zealand, which is, upskilling, training, learning more, engaging. So, let's remember there's thousands and thousands and thousands of us now who have suffered.
And just to pick up on Sandra's point, I think it's a really important one because it comes back to that shame and stigma that's often involved with debt. People don't like talking about their debt, and as part of my my research, I went around and I asked students, like, how is debt affecting you? And the first thing everyone says is, oh, I'm fine. But then you start asking a few more questions, and suddenly it turns out that they're really stressed, and they're trying not to think about the future because they have no idea how they're going to pay off their loans, or they're really worried about the impact of their loan is having on their friend, and start speaking about the mental health issues around there. So there's that stigma there that we have to kind of be conscious of and open out a bit, because it is such a collective issue.
Also, maybe I totally agree with everything you guys are saying, and I think on that point of like intergenerational equity, often there's like this assumption made by government that if people's parents earn over the threshold amount to accessing the student allowance, then those parents are able to support their children, which for many reasons is wrong. But one of the clear reasons why it is wrong is that these parents of the students that are now in study have also still trying to recover from paying off their debt. And as Sandra talked about, you know, this is an intergenerational thing that's happening now, and it's not just the people currently in study. I mean, this has been we've had, you know, the cost of education fall on the individual for 30 years since 1990. And so it is beginning to show its intergenerational face. But I also just want to say that education used to be free in New Zealand, that before 1990, education was considered a public good. And that changed in 1990 in a suite of neoliberal reforms of the Labour government. And so, but although I think that it's important that we don't romanticize back about, you know, education back then, because it was very elitist, it was, you know, not nearly the number of people were able to access it than it is now. We have, it is also important to bear in mind that it's actually not a radical idea. Like, this was part of the fabric of New Zealand, that education was something that was a public good. And also, primary and secondary education is also considered a public good in this country. It's not a radical idea that education in general is, you know, is a public good. For 2/3 of our education sector, it is free. We just need to ensure that tertiary education is kind of swept under the same rug and is also free.
And it links back to, like you said, Sylvia, about the intergenerational impacts of like places like the UK, how they have sharp transitions, and here in New Zealand it's just scattered over time. And it's a true reflection of how student voice currently is set up here in New Zealand. And I can speak particularly on Pacific Student Voice. They used to have gatherings every year for Pacific Student Voice whanau between 99 and 2011, and then between 2011 and 2018 there was nothing. And you know, obviously with all these reforms, they've realised that, hey, the Pacific Student Voice is missing. So there's been a sharp change for us to actually mobilise together and start contributing and making up for that lost time. And that's been a sad thing that I've seen across. And obviously, not just for Pacific groups, now we're seeing our refugee community students, our rainbow students, our disabled learners, and those students, their voices have been forgotten too. Now it's time for sharp movement to bring them to the table. Otherwise, we're gonna face some pretty bad stuff that we've seen in the past. But yeah, there's something I picked up from what you just shared, and I was not talking about debt, but obviously student voice as a whole anyway, because that's the harsh reality of being student politicians and so forth currently.
Ali, I think you've picked up on one of the really most disastrous things about seeing education as a commodity that everybody buys and making you pay for it. And that's that it doesn't see students as the whole people that you've been talking about. It sees them as people who are buying a commodity from an institution. And as a consumer, you have many fewer rights than you have when you're actually seen as students. So I can sit around in institutions and nobody actually talks about students. They talk about ifs, they talk about the dollars they're making. They talk about, and that's a terrible way for education to head, because it dehumanizes our institutions. It removes the real people. They don't talk about staff either, by the way. They talk about, equivalent full-time. So ifs, so we have this real FTE, we have this real issue of dehumanizing our sector and turning it into just another market. And, all power to us now. If we can collectivize and really get back on the table the fact that you guys deserve a better future, your kids deserve a better future, I think now's the time, because we've shown up the market to be completely broken. It's not a market. It is a human and social service, what we do. Education is more than dollars.
You want to add anything onto that one, Noel?
Yeah, no, just to support what's been said, definitely. I think, a barrier-free education, that's really important. And, for us, for Māori, the important thing at the moment for Māori is, for Māori students, is recruitment, retention, completion. Those are the three things that are main focus for Māori students. And how do we achieve that? Barrier-free education. That's pretty much it. But tautoko the kōrero that's been said, I don't want to double up on anything, but yeah, tautoko.
Thanks, Noho. So now I'm going to move on to our second question for the evening in terms of substantial questions. And this one is for you, Ali. I've actually just, I've got a second question because I think you've kind of touched on the first one a little bit as well. So I'll just pose them both to you. So the first is, how would a universal education income be beneficial for people that need to retrain? COVID has meant that a lot of people are out of jobs, and it's also meant that a lot of sectors aren't exactly that viable at the moment. We've seen the impact on our forestry sectors and a lot of other ones. So how will this be beneficial to those people that need to retrain, and also those people who might be studying for the first time or study later on in life? How will that look?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sam. Obviously, when you think of universal education income, obviously it will help strengthen the resilience for a lot of people. The universal education income will act as a vehicle to help individuals and also communities and families chase their dreams and aspirations through education. Obviously, personally, I've worked in a few factories in the past, and over summer, some of the parents that I work with, obviously above 40, don't have access to things like student allowance, have made the sacrifice to just work a low-skilled job, low wages for over 20 years so that their kids can have access to it. But they've had their own dreams and aspirations when they, this was working with a lot of Pacific people, and they migrated to New Zealand for opportunity and obviously to access education, particularly higher education, to upskill, and one day maybe take it back home, and just that barrier, that wall that's been put up for them has just prevented them from actually chasing their dreams and aspirations. And we know with COVID-19, the whole situation, it's made people think twice about some career paths that people were planning and thinking of, and with that, it's re-motivated a lot of people that wanted to upskill to think, look back to what their dreams were when they initially when they came to New Zealand. So, to me, that's why I think what a universal education income will be beneficial for people, is that it allows them to help facilitate gradual long-term gains for their families and so forth. So essentially, just really strengthening our resilience to actually make that call to take the plunge and make that first step. And I know all of us around this virtual table, we all had to take that first step whenever we first enrolled to our tertiary provider. So they'll be thinking about that process and how they can, get there. So essentially just really strengthen out the resilience for a lot of people.
The other thing it would do, I think that Ali touched on this, is that currently, the cost of being a student means that for many people, they don't have the luxury of choice. And choice, sadly, is a luxury, right? Because there are barriers in place that prevent quite a few people from being able to access tertiary education. And I've just read in the news, it just came on about 5 minutes before we came on live, that 300,000 people are currently applying for benefits with WINS at the moment. And that's because of the, rapid rise in unemployment because of COVID-19. And those people don't have a choice to study, because it is more financially better off for them to be on a benefit, because not only does it not add to their loan, but it is more money in their hand each week. And I'm not totally support increasing benefits. I think it's really, really important. But if those people want to study, frankly, they don't have the choice, because $239.76 a week, which they currently receive from living costs, is completely insufficient for a family or for an individual to afford to live. A flat in Wellington for a 1-bedroom in a 3-bedroom flat, which is probably what lots of people live in, is $215. So you're left with $24 at the end of the week to buy your food, pay for power, all your weekly expenses. And I don't know about you, but I can't you know, no one can do that. It's completely unlivable. And so we need to totally rethink this idea of what students can get, to give people choice and to give people dignity, so they're not tied to the state to determine and to like give all their personal details in order to just get some money on the table so that they can afford the food. You know, it's about dignity and it's about choice.
Isabella, I guess kind of on that, can you remember Victoria University announced pretty early on in the piece that for semester 2 they would be opening up, was it free for anyone who needed it? What's your thoughts on that whole situation?
Yeah, so what Vic have done is that if you're not currently like enrolled in a student and you've been impacted by COVID-19, then you're able to get free fees during the second semester of 2020. I mean, I'm all for free education. I think ultimately the responsibility for education rests with the state. And so the government needs to come through, and it shouldn't just be one tertiary provider that is providing free education. We need to see it across all of our polytechnics and all of our universities that are currently, you know, associated with the government. And so, I mean, you know, as a token gesture, I think it's important, and I think it will probably help many people. But actually, the real cost that is the real barrier for people entering into study is the week-to-week cost of living, which is the kind of student support package which rests with government.
Can I just say real quick, just on your choice thing, I thought that was really, you know, that's such a powerful point. Izzy, and something that I saw lots when I was a student was that lots of people also, that choice impacted their choice of study as well, because even if people were passionate about something, say a Bachelor of Arts subject or something along those matters, they don't pick their passion and they don't choose to pursue their passion because it's not financially viable or it's not an option that they can actually live by. So I really like that point you just made.
Yeah, it was actually, I was just going to tell a wee story, because one of my friend's children, they wanted to really go into acting school. They're really good at it. That was their passion. But mum and dad both had minimum wage jobs. And she came to me one day and she said, I'm going to go and do a 12-week course in hairdressing. I can't follow my passion. I can't be who I want. And, you know, it's really hard to hear those stories and who's missing out. I mean, she was going to do something in tertiary, but nothing like she wanted. And I guess, you know, here I reflect on my father, who was put into a boat building career when he was 15 years old by his father for good reason. But my father worked for 50 years in a profession he didn't want to be part of. And I don't want that future for anyone. I think, you know, people deserve to follow their passion and their bliss. And I tell you what, when you're studying, you do better if you're doing what you're feeling passionate about. You enjoy it, you get into it. So, you know, let's not forget education should be transformative and great fun.
I'd just add as well, there's quite a body of research out there now as well, which is looking at the impact of, if you do have large loans, you tend to, after study, head off into the corporate sector rather than the public sector jobs. And I think pre-COVID, there would have been some people out there going, oh, well, that's all right. But actually, you know, in this post-COVID environment, we're really reminded about just how vital that kind of public work is. And so it's again one of those things that, I mean, debt really does shape how you think about the world, and not in a helpful way.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, like obviously, yeah, debt just adds that negative stigma that's for students, and that makes us some of the most vulnerable people in society. And however, I think looking back at the universal education income, you know, if we have that at play and have it implemented, you know, the students that have the greatest potential from appropriate action, like the universal student income. So I think that will be real beneficial to actually help people take that first step that we mentioned earlier to pursue their goals and aspirations through education.
Yeah, tautoko Ali, and tautoko what Izzy talked about too, I guess, and for me, it's addressing the inequities. It's really seeing where the vulnerability is and putting those resources towards those vulnerable places. That's the main thing I want to push for in terms of our mahi here. So it's really identifying those inequities and identifying vulnerable spaces and utilising our resource into those spaces. that's a key area. That's a key message too.
An important thing about it being universal is it's not embarrassing to get it either. Because when you have to identify I'm poor and I need your help, or I'm vulnerable and I need your help, it's really demoralizing. So with universal, I mean, worldwide, when they talk about universal benefits or universal incomes or universal education support, it takes away that stigma of being a person who receives help from other taxpayers. Because we've got to remember, we're not receiving money from the government. It's our choice as a community to share our wealth, to share our money, to share our care. And I think that's really important. But, remove the stigma. Don't make people go in and prove that they're $1 below the threshold and they need the money. Take away that stigma, take away all that paperwork, make it available to everyone, and let's just work it out with the progressive.
Just to add to Sandra's point as well, I think I fully support everything, but there's also just a really practical argument to be made here as well, apart from all the reasons that have already been given, that it's just like students are pretty much all over the age of 18, and so their lives are, they never fit nicely into the boxes that are provided by those government department forms which ask you to apply for a student allowance. You can't predict, it's almost impossible to predict the extent to which parents are supporting students. Some are, but many aren't, and sort of measures like the wealth of parents and things like that are really blunt tools that actually don't work. From my conversations with students as part of my research, there were so many students who were saying, look, in theory, I'm not eligible for the student allowance, but I get absolutely no support at all. So yeah, it's in practice, it doesn't work out.
It's expensive to administer. It's silly. We spend too much time on the paperwork.
I'd like to thank everyone for that. And yeah, with the whole paperwork thing, it is quite interesting how that is another huge cost associated with it. Aside from the actual delivered, service, there's all this other stuff that's just incurring further costs to, I guess, us as the students and us as the taxpayer. And so this is a bit of a kind of on the campaign end question for Izzy here. With the first year fees free, has that impacted, I guess, the negotiations and stuff for something like this?
Yeah, first year free was and has been a really interesting piece of policy. I just want to quote Jacinda when she announced this policy. It was actually ironically at the coincidentally at the high school I went to, Ngā Pono Waiora, Western Springs College in Tumuaki Makaurau in Auckland. And when she said that, she said, when all of us are trained, that benefits all of us, and that benefits the New Zealand economy as a whole. And so along that sentiment, Jacinda and her government introduced fees free as a marker that they also believed that education was a public good. And it also was introduced with a package of $50 increases to student allowance and $50 increases to living costs, which I have to shout out to all my predecessors at NZUSA, because they fought for this stuff for years. And in 2017, we saw a turning of the tide. Despite the fact that the purpose of the policy, and we know this from the kind of negotiations that took place in the education sector, the purpose of fees free, which just to provide some context, is a 3-year free education policy. We have seen 1 year of it. So we've seen 1/3 of this policy being rolled out, was to ensure that people didn't leave education with a whole heap of debt, and that debt could be something that people could access and that people had a choice to access. So it was this whole idea of public good, which is that it benefits all of us, it's not just benefiting us as an individual. The thing about fees free is that once it was implemented, all of the commentary was made by people who, I must say, were actually benefiters of the free education prior to 1990. But all of the discussion was about Fs and the fact that it hasn't increased the number of students in tertiary education. what that has meant is that the impact on our lives as students has been completely ignored from this discussion. It has been completely about numbers, not about the benefit of alleviating debt. And it's meant that people have $5,000 to $6,000 less debt on their loan, which is huge when you think about it, when you come out of a $32,000 loan at the end of your 3-year university degree. So none of that has been discussed in the media. And I think that although we saw that turning of the tide, we've let people speak for us about the impact of this particular policy. And also the media has only wanted to talk about ifs as opposed to the impact on students' lives and the transformative impact that fees free has had. So I guess on one hand, it signaled that the government has the potential and ideologically agrees with us on the idea that education is a public good, but unfortunately we have seen that the public are more concerned about numbers than about the impact on people's lives. And I think this ties in with the whole neoliberal agenda about the Fs and and universities and politics talk about it themselves. They just talk about numbers, as Sandra said, in terms of the human element of it. But I think that when we come back to that quote of Jacinda, that education benefits all of us, I've been hanging on to that as a form of hope, because if she believes that, and if she said that when she came into government, then she has the power to make education barrier-free for all of us. And that now looks like a universal education income. So she believes that, and Chris Hipkins believes that. We just have to get them to follow through with their actions.
Nazzy, I think you nailed that one, and I know that was one that people were really interested to understand the dynamic between fees free, and because it was such a so topical, it's such a topical policy, and how that's impacted the current negotiations. And I like also how you gave a bit of a mihi to the former NZUSA presidents, and kind of signalling how this has been such a kind of slow burning journey. And I think I've been thinking a lot lately how crazy it is that they were able to, almost overnight implement this extra $25 on top of benefits. And it makes me wonder what other things can be implemented overnight and are actually possible. And I think, doing this kind of kōrero and the campaign that you've been doing, and the campaigns from presidents before you, are the kind of things that can encourage the government to do the right thing and to get behind these kaupapa. Because I think it's one thing to say the government should do this and to throw rocks, but it's another thing to give them the mandate to do it. And I think you're doing that so well. So a massive mihi to you and to Te Mana Ākonga, Tauira Pasifika, and everyone that's been working on this campaign. And just before, we were talking about shame and stigma, and I had a bit of a throwback actually to when I was in a hall in 2016, because I remember there were a lot of wealthier kids in the hall who were actually eligible for the student allowance because their parents were able to move the money around through trusts and other mechanisms so that they could illegally get the student allowance. And that was interesting to me because, that to them was quite funny. It was like, yeah, we're eligible for this thing that only poor students are eligible for. But it also made me think about Materia Ture and how she did the same thing. But yet when she does that, it's a totally different story. And that makes me think about the inequities and the differences in terms of Māori and the way that we look at, we process these situations that are essentially the same thing, but we look at them differently based on the people who are accessing that benefit. And it goes back to that shame and that stigma, and then it's compounded based on existing racism and discrimination that's in our society. And just on that point around Māori, Noho, we know that Māori in New Zealand are overrepresented in our negative mental health statistics, but also you yourself have done a lot of really incredible work on mental health, your short film Poor and your other advocacy that you've done. And I wanted to know from your perspective and what you're hearing from our tauira Māori, do you think that this whole situation with the lockdown and with COVID-19, do you think there's going to be a bit of like a hangover kind of effect on students' mental health? And what will that look like?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Tam. Like you said, Tam, pre-COVID, Te iwi Māori has had the worst health outcomes. And as a young Māori male, I'm in the most vulnerable group. So TMA's concern, Te Mana Ākonga's concern, is that the inequities that exist before this pandemic are going to be increased. So that's a fear that we have, is that, you know, like you said, is there kind of a hangover in terms of mental health? Yeah, from a Māori perspective, I'm very, very kind of anxious in a way to see what the outcomes is, because I don't want to mention any stories that we've heard. We've heard a lot of conversations between our Māori Students Associations and our Māori student reps, and sadly enough, we've heard some news, and I just want to acknowledge that person. So big sending aroha to her and her whānau. But yeah, there's some it's the stories, it's the real life impacts that have some sort of effect on what myself, Mosey, and the rest of Te Mana Ākonga do. And so, am I concerned or am I worried about a hangover? Most definitely. As I just said, as you just said, Tam, pre-COVID, we were the worst in stats, Māori, worst in health. And, you know, like I said, young Māori males, you know, those stats are just out the gate. So yeah, definitely there is a concern there. But in terms of the issues that we want to reinforce, I guess the main three issues is the isolations creating a loss of connections. These connections help Māori retention. So by that I mean that students, because we're virtually online now, and most tertiary providers are going to online learning, we're losing that kind of physical connection, if that makes sense. And that in a way supports and thrives other Māori students around them. You know, having that support, you know, going back to, you know, I'm sure that you guys are all familiar with it. And I know Ali in the Pacific community see similar views. You know, whānau hapu iwi is a big part of every Māori. And so therefore, you're not just focusing on those issues that impact that student, but everyone that surrounds that student. So definitely looking at ways of kind of in a way utilising still those Māori spaces for some of our campuses who have marae. You know, I know it's, you know, I don't know the technical side of things of how it's going to work, but definitely keen to look into ways that we can reopen in a safe environment our common spaces, again, to utilise that physical connection and support. Another one is increased anxiety and depression. So that's always a big concern, and going in through COVID-19 and the impacts that all of this has had on a Māori student, there's no doubt that this is going to cause or increase anxiety and depression amongst our Māori students. And lastly, just the loss of motivation to study. So going back to my original point about the isolation situation, again, Māori thrive. For Māori students, we thrive with a community kind of environment, an iwi hapu whānau sort of environment. So trying to look at ways of those solutions of eliminating those, you know, that's something Te Mana Ākonga is also focused on. And I'm sure that these are conversations that we can have with this campaign, what this campaign can look like and how it can impact not only students' finance but it's their mental health and wellbeing support too. So yeah, kia ora.
Can I do a big shout out to all the student association people who are really looking after students right now, but also the support staff, because it's really hard to really support people when you can't meet them and you can't talk with them face to face. And like I say, staff feel they're just not giving enough, even though they're just, you know, on campus for many people is so much better. Some people thrive in online, but most of us thrive. And I do want to acknowledge that we can't go back to a system. Before COVID, we saw student services being stripped out, support staff being let go, whole programs being closed. And what I want to say is pastoral care, looking after our students, providing them with safe spaces, making sure it's culturally appropriate, making sure it meets their family needs, their whānau needs, is not a nice to have. And governments have got to stop treating the whole the whole education system as one where all it's about is the lessons. It's about so much more. And again, back to the beginning of the kōrero that we've had, it's about whole people, and whole people bring with them family, whānau. They bring with them problems, they bring with them great stuff. Let's get back to a system that really cares about you as students, and really cares about your health and well-being. And you know, thoughts to any students at the moment that are really struggling, please reach out to the support staff, please reach out to the student associations. Really crucial.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to also thank you, Sandra. You just reminded me. Yeah, I want to give a big mihi too to our Māori support services, our Māori student leaders, Māori student associations who have put in and dedicated a lot of their time and resources, their limited resources, but the resources that they have, and provided, in my opinion, amazing outcomes with those, with those resources that they have. So a big mihi to, and I know that you guys are watching, and so I want to take this time to acknowledge all of you, kaiarahi, also you, your students too, for, I guess, doing what you guys are doing. And also a big mihi too, I also forgot a minor point too, is that we're also doing a comprehensive nationwide study that will give us a more depth into student experience, so that we can advocate for those, for the needed support. So that's something we're trying to Mana Ākonga is trying to focus on, is the survey, this research paper. And I want to give a big mihi to Zane Akuhata Huntington, who was the lead researcher behind this, and I want to give him a big shout out, because I think this is putting Te Mana Ākonga in a really good place in terms of the survey and how we can utilise it to, again, address those needs and interests of Māori. So kia ora.
Yeah, thanks, Noel. That was awesome kōrero. Just add into that, just a constant reminder that students are the experts. And obviously there's this this mother or auntie we have at our university, and she always talks about, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and that speaks volumes for our students and our support staff and whatnot. Obviously we've heard Chippy in the news talk about talking about student support and all that sort of stuff, but has he really talked to us? Didn't think so. So obviously we've got heaps of experts here in this chat, and people tuning in, and obviously like Sandra said, reach out to your student associations and support staff, because they're going to be walking side by side to help you kick that door down and make our voices heard. Because obviously we've had enough. It's been so many years of students being neglected and just forgotten, but it's funny because we're the experts, and with this hangover thing we're talking about post COVID-19, some of these institutions think that online learning is the way to go, but we already know there's a digital divide happening at the moment, and they got a lot of catch up to do. And one thing that's been stressed in our Pacific communities, we live in overcrowded homes, but some people think it's a bad thing, but for me it's a good thing, because I'm in close contact with my family and my loved ones, and that lifts me spiritually and emotionally and so forth. And obviously it would be hard to study because there's heaps of noise in the background, but mentally that just helps me get through, and it's hard for us to actually continue to study because there's just too many of us in the house, but we don't have that quiet space to concentrate and do our work. And that I just don't want our institutions to forget about situations like that, because they think we don't have lives outside of our education. They just seem, we'll just shift everything online. Students will be sweet. They have more leniency to do work in their own time, all that. But we've got lives, we've got family, we've got communities we're part of that we love giving time and support to them. So our institutions, not just our institutions, but there's head honchos, and also some of the ministers need to wake up and start talking to students, because what they're doing so far isn't enough. And that 20 million victory we got over the weekend, that took them 6 weeks to respond to students, and obviously that's not good enough, and we want them to start talking to us regularly.
Can I also just pick up on a few points that have been said, because I think I guess just stepping back, there's been such a focus, and this is sort of pulling in a point, as he said earlier, that there's just been such a big emphasis given to counting the numbers of bums on seats at our institutions, that we've and then following, we measure the numbers that come in one end and the numbers that go out the other end, to put it really bluntly, and we've forgot about that time in the middle. And that's when you have all those issues around retention and drop off. And I want to pick up on I'm really delighted to hear about that work that's being done about that time at university, and especially around issues to do with mental health and loneliness, because one of the things that really shocked me when I was going around, I went to my research was focused around universities, and I went around all of the universities and spoke to students, and I ended up hearing this statement over and over again, which was that I haven't made friends at university until my 3rd year. And that really shocked me, because it really sits in opposition to a lot of our assumptions about what university is about, that you go there and you make lots of friends and you meet new people, all that sort of stuff. But these students who were telling me this were like, well, I haven't had a chance because I'm working several part-time jobs to try and, just make the rent and try and keep my debt down and do all the right things. And so we've created these circumstances while people are at university, but we're not actually seeing what's happening there. Our focus has always been on counting the participation rates and not thinking about the questions of what's actually happening while students are at university.
Can I just, and it's something I often say when I catch up with student association presidents in various spaces. I also think one thing we're stealing from you, those of you who are currently studying, is we're stealing your life from you, because you do have to work jobs and you have to study, and that means you have no time for doing the things that you should be doing, particularly when you're young, but for those of us who are older, not just engaging in things on campus, but having a life outside, spending time with your family. And we've got to stop doing that. We've got to stop stealing your lives from you and actually let you have some breathing space. And that's what a universal, allowance would actually do, or a universal income would do. You could actually have a life as well as study, and that would be lovely to see.
Well, kia ora. Thank you all for your whakaaro on that question. And just to the people watching at home, young Matt had to dip off early this evening as it's his dad's birthday. So happy birthday to young Matt's dad. And if you want to, he does heaps of really awesome podcasts, lots of student content, lots of political content as well. So you can find his podcast, Young Matt NZ, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and everything. So definitely recommend checking that out. And just before I go on to our last question for the night, which is to Sandra, I just wanted to ask Noho and Ali quickly, because what you both said really resonated with me in terms of the, I guess, the implications for the Māori and Pacific communities in terms of being locked down. And I wanted to know, sorry, it's a bit off the cuff, but do you have any advice for people watching right now that, we know that young, or actually not just young, but Māori and Pacific men are again even more overrepresented in our worst mental health statistics. And if you can, and if you're comfortable, are you willing to share just a few tips or things that you've been doing during the lockdown that helps you out and gets your wairua feeling a bit better, that you can share with people watching right now?
Yeah, I gotta say, this, I guess to some this is easy, this lockdown situation. There's people who find it quite breezy just to stay home and work from home and whatnot, and that's totally fine. But there are those who struggle to even be home when sometimes university or other areas are their place of escape, and from home sometimes, because we just have this, again, this assumption that everyone has a good home and that kind of whakaaro. So there's also, we can't forget those who come from different backgrounds and different homes where it's just not a place that's comfortable to be. So in saying that, I don't have that experience and therefore can't comment a lot on that. But like Ali mentioned before, it's just reaching out for support, because there's always someone there. That's the only way I can stress it, is that when you're in that negative space and that mindset, and actually my mum used to tell me a lot of times when I used to struggle a lot at university too, because the pressure of getting assignments in, staying on top of studies, trying to work. At that time, I was working 2 part-time jobs and a real casual job. So the flexibility there is, was a struggle, trying to be flexible, and so that experience then left me in a pretty pretty distinct place, and therefore I remember my mum saying to me, you know, that everything's temporary. This whole mindset is temporary. You know, there's always a light at the tunnel, and you just have to address it in the way that you can. So just remember, the best way to just deal with it is that it's just temporary. It's a temporary mindset. You know, there's always a positive outcome on the other end. But that's the advice, I guess. Just find what you love. You know, I'm here with my nan. I live with my nan here in Hastings. You know, it was an idea. I wanted to move back home after graduating last year, and you know, this could have been a bit better time to be here with her in lockdown. And you know, I want to give a shout out to my nan, because every day my nan's fills my heart up. You know, they kind of, their wairua, they cup up with a lot of love and aroha, and you know, I take my hat off to her, and you know, she always sees me in my room constantly, and Izzy and Ali can vouch for this too, with our constant hui's every hour on the hour, and then just coming in to check on me to see if I'm all good, if I need anything. Little things like that make a big difference. So definitely surrounding yourself with that aroha, and I know, you know, some people cannot relate to that, having a safe environment at home, but it's definitely looking for your passion, that thing that comforts you, all that stuff. Really, that's the best advice I could give. I mean, Ali could, you know, Ali might have another whakaaro, but yeah, definitely remember, temporary. It's a temporary mindset. That's all. Kia ora.
That short-term pain for long-term gain, and obviously that's what we're all going to experience. And just like Noho, I'm in my bubble. It's just me and my nana, and yeah, I think we got something in common, that you know, we live with our nanas, and you know, they look after us and we look after them. It goes both ways, and it's that intergenerational health and well-being model that our Pacific and Māori communities do extremely well. And you know, for Pacific students checking in and stuff to keep us going and things like that, is, you know, being surrounded by my nana. It just reminds me the sacrifices she made when she migrated from Samoa in the late 60s. You know, imagine her transition from Samoa to New Zealand. You know, she left warm tropics to little cold Wellington, and you know, spoke very limited English, and it was real hard for her to adjust. So like, you know, that pressure she had, you know, that's you know, I can't compare to that. And she keeps me honest, and you know, it just constantly reminds me that, you know, what they had to sacrifice for their grandkids and their own kids to have access to opportunities that this land of milk and honey has to offer. So really being surrounded by our families and hearing their stories, like I've you know, been at home with her, I've got to learn more about you know, mangafo or whakapapa and just the stories. Like, it just motivates me all the time, and that's what's getting me through this this period of you know, uncertainty and turbulent times. But you know, and I know many Pacific students across the country, you know, in bubbles with their grandparents, even great grandparents, who, you know, and I've seen a lot of posts on social media about how they've, you know, been talking to their grandma and the stories they shared and things like that. So, and that just really hones the health and well-being of our students, and those students are translating that into their own student communities. And there's a lot of Pacific student clubs and associations across the country that are keeping the students engaged and motivated with little tips, tricks, and just sharing their daily vlogs and so forth. So, you know, and it all relates back to our values of family, love, and respect, and it's something that's been prominent for us throughout this time.
Shout out to the nannies one time, straight up. You keep going, Noho.
Yeah, I just want to, totally what Ali said, you know, about putting it into perspective, I guess, and realizing that a lot of our, you know, a lot of my tipuna, a lot of my grandparents, great grandparents, and so on and so forth, have sacrificed a lot. And I think putting it in perspective for me to drive me to, you know, to do what I do and carry on doing what I do is, you know, I always relate back to those stories like Ali talked about. So, yeah. Not saying that I want one up there or whatever in those stories. I'm just saying those are things that motivate me. So, yeah.
Saying your whānau's worked too hard for the government to come in here and stuff it all up. Nah, just kidding. Just kidding. We love working together. And Izzy, I just wanted to throw it over to you real quick. Do you have any of your own advice for students out there, you know, struggling with being locked down and isolated from their communities?
Yeah, I guess I'm different. I live with my brother. I still live with my family, and I think that I've got that real privilege of being able to like connect with family and like learn about things during this time that we may not necessarily have been able to do. Like when I think back to when I was a student, I know how hard it is being a student and how hard it is not having like hope or that light to keep going. And I think that, as Nohorua alluded to, and now we have Zui all the time, and we always just begin our meetings just with like a debrief just to see how each other are going. And I think that actually that has what's got me through, because you know, we've pulled really long days and really long nights to get through this period for our students. And sometimes we just have to, and I think this is for all students, we just have to pause and think, we're in a friggin' pandemic. Like, this is not normal. It's okay for us to just, you know, have a break, have the opportunity to talk to our friends and to not overwork ourselves, and to recognize that in 10 years time, or even in 2 months time, when we're through this lockdown, we will look at us and we'll congratulate ourselves on getting through one of the most scary and uncertain times in our lives. And I think that if there's one piece of advice I can give to people, is just like, do what you need to survive, and that's all you need to do.
Powerful words there from all of you. I think you're exceptional student representatives. I think our Tauira are very lucky to have you all. And it's even more powerful that you're all working together to find the solution. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Sandra, I think this is the perfect place for you to step in as the tuakana of this kōrero, because I would love for you to just nail it home and just to show us, you know, you've been present, you've been active, pushing for change in this space. So why is this transformative response needed in the tertiary education sector after COVID-19?
Look, we have, we have united together as a nation, as the Prime Minister keeps reminding us, to get through this pandemic. But we don't want to come out the other side and end up with a world that repeats all the inequalities, all the inequities, all of the problems that a pre-COVID society had. So this is the time for us to reflect and say, if we can do this together, we can actually support really high quality public tertiary education that benefits everybody, that's accessible to everybody. If we can beat a pandemic like this, we can make our world really, 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 really much better. And I think the thing is that this pandemic actually tells us why we should do it, because actually we need trained nurses to look after us. We need people who understand about viruses and can give advice to people who work in supermarkets about how to keep our food safe, us safe, to keep, the world safe. We need people who really can provide care in extraordinary times. We've proved that we need these trained people, so we need to support their training. We need to support them in getting the skills to make sure our world is a great place it can be. Even down to the political analysis all of you are doing, because, you are students who have a really keen eye on this, in part because you are students and you've learned and you've grown and you've learned the political analysis. We need more of that to create a much, much, much stronger world, a much kinder world, and a world where I know that kids, in primary school are looking and going, I could go out and I could do an apprenticeship, or I could go to university, or I could go to a polytechnic or a wānanga. I could train myself, but I'm excited about learning and I see multiple opportunities. Because I tell you, I've been in a classroom where I saw a young refugee girl talking about the world and going, my only option is to take a minimum wage job. We don't want that future anymore. You guys give me great hope that we don't have to put up with it. And I guess, we just have to get through to the other end of this and say, we want a better world. We don't want one where poor people are dying at greater rates because of COVID-19. We don't want one where Māori have a life expectancies that mean, return to work at 60 is not, is dangerous because of health outcomes for Māori being so unequal. We don't want one where apprentices are losing their jobs right now and they're not supported. and they're dropping out and they will disappear. And, you know, I want to shout out to Ali and Noho. These are young men who will disappear. They will disappear from jobs, they'll disappear from training, and we lose them. And we're a poorer society if we let that happen. So, you know, I guess my shout out is actually now to the grandparents of the Tauira sitting here. It is to the nannies. It is to the aunties and the uncles. It's time that you actually defended your mokopuna's rights to a great future and stood with these amazing, amazing students.
Well, whānau, we're almost at the end of our session for the evening. Thank you to everybody still watching at home. I hope that you've been able to take away lots of inspiration, motivation, some wisdom, some knowledge about, you know, a better perception of what a reality could be for us and that we should be fighting for. So I'm gonna do a round so we can all do our kind of our final last thoughts to our students, our whānau, our teachers, our lecturers that are watching from home. One of the key things that people always ask after these kōrero on the town hall is how they can stay in touch with the kaupapa that you're all driving. So noho your guys' survey, Izzy your petition. So really drive those points home. I just want to give a mihi to my co-host, young Matt, who's had to dip off. He's been awesome. Again, you can check out his podcast, Young Matt Show, on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. To stay in touch with these kōrero. The Aotearoa Town Hall is all about having these wānanga, these talanoa, these conversations that are critical to us moving as a society together that is conscious and is able to imagine a reality for ourselves that is better than what we're currently being given. So I want to thank you all, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you all for tonight and for sharing your whakaaro. I guess my big thing that I'll say is that the Action Station petition that is in the comments right now is only 145 signatures away from that 4,000 signature goal. So to everyone watching it tonight, I encourage you to share this petition. Let's get it over the line, and let's get those final few signatures. And for closing comments, we'll start with you, Sylvia, then we'll go to Noho, Ali, Sandra, and then Izzy to close off.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, listening, it's been a real privilege listening to everyone tonight. And I think what I've taken away more than anything is just the need to humanize our sector and to get those stories out, because we're so used to talking about issues like student debt in terms of kind of abstract numbers or in terms of bums on seats or whatever language you're going to use. But in the end, these are people, and they're very diverse people, and so we need a system that works for them.
Just from me, I think it's really seeing our conversations here on this panel discussion. I think, you know, that collaboration right here shows the impacts and of what our kind of kōrero could take us. And so therefore, my thing that I want to leave here, and for audiences watching, and for those who are in those positions of power around decision making, whatever level, is to please have Māori at those tables, at those decision making tables. That is really important, whether it's a governance level or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just making sure Māori are at those tables, as recognised in our tiriti. You know, it's a real key factor in terms of moving forward and identifying, you know, what Sandra talked about. You know, this, you know, we don't want to be here in the future. I don't want my kids to be, or my mokopuna to be in this kind of predicament. So, you know, we want to kind of create that environment where all our mokopuna across the country, no matter your nationality, your background, how hard to, you know, as long as it's you know, I'm just trying to collaborate everyone's whakaaros, you know, like Izzy said about you know, it's a public good, it's a right, you know, of studying. So making sure that, you know, there's barrier-free education, all that stuff. But yeah, it really just starts back at having Māori at those tables, those decision-making tables. So therefore, those inequities are met. So yeah, kia ora.
It's just been awesome being on here on this Aotearoa Town Hall. It's been a privilege and a blessing to sit beside these awesome proud advocates for not just students, but our whole tertiary sector as a whole. And I just want to leave with for proverb in Samoa. It goes like this: "Le sili le taʻilio le tapua'i." And it translates to lead is not as important to support. And yeah, right now, students, support staff across the tertiary sector need the support. And it's about reframing the narrative around the stigmas that we've been talking about. I know there's a lot of backlash against what students are trying to advocate for, but me, Noho, and Isabella here to open to chat to you and really tell you and share the realities of what's going on the ground, and likewise of Sandra and Sylvia too. So, and really just keen to help support students out there, particularly our Pacific students. I'm always here open. I can be your brother, can support you in whatever means. But again, like Noho and Isabella mentioned about our petitions and so forth, each group, Te Mana Ākonga, Tauira Pasifika, NZUSA, we all have our own surveys that we're really trying to gather stories of our students to really paint a picture to these decision makers, because it's a situation where it should be nothing about us without us. And unfortunately, that's how it has been. I mean, we've been forgotten, but we're trying to really reframe the narrative that we need to be in the rooms talking as well, just as Noho said. So you can contact us via our social media platforms. For Pacific students, Tauira Pasifika, find us just at Tauira Pasifika, Insta, Facebook, and yeah. So once again, whaftai te le lava, mawa noa, so forth. Thank you.
It follows on really well with what Ali just said. Working together, we can actually make the future really, really bright. I often say to our members, we just need to remember that our conditions of work are our students' conditions of learning, and vice versa. There can be no way that we can be divided in this space. So the last bit I would say, I guess, is join your union, a student union, or a union because you're in a job and you need that support. Because actually, what we've all said tonight is we can't do it alone. It's collaboration, it's working with others, it's sharing, whether it's our whānau or the people at work or the people that you study with. So join a union.
Great point, Sandra. I think that before I can kind of get into where people might be able to feed into this campaign going forward, for me, there's been two big kind of words that have come out of it, and one of that is choice, and the other is intergenerational equity. And I think on choice, to really echo what Noho was saying, like that choice can either be, who we bring to the table, and that choice can also be, what the dream of tertiary education can look like for people. And I think back to my mum who's watching tonight and think, when she left school, she didn't have the choice to go to tertiary education. She didn't have the choice to go to university. And I'm just privileged that I was able to have that choice when I left school. But also I want to echo what Noho said, we have the choice to do things differently. We have the choice to live Te Tiriti right now. And as Pākehā, we have the choice to decolonize and to strip some of our power to ensure other people are heard at the table. And if that's what we can do as Tauira, as students right now, to make sure that there are people heard at the table, then everyone can do it. Government can do it, the health sector can do it, the justice sector can do it, our universities can do it, and we need to do it now because this is a pandemic and we need to revolutionize the way that we work. The second thing I want to talk about is intergenerational equity, and I think this comes back to what I said about choice and about, thinking about I'm the daughter and granddaughter of people that didn't go to university because they didn't have the choice and the system didn't work for people to be able to engage if they had barriers in place. So this is an issue of bringing people together, whether they're grandparents, whether they're parents, whether they're currently in the school system. We have the opportunity to make things different, not only for ourselves here today, but for our children and their children. And I guess this leads on to my next point about how we can move forward. So a campaign around education needs everyone, right? That needs the vice chancellors of our universities, the chief executives of our polytechs. It needs the people who can build websites, the people who can speak and mobilize. It needs everyone, but most importantly, it needs students. There are 400,000 students in tertiary education right now. And if you look to who wrote, the social history books, it is students. It's because we have come together and we have mobilized and we have realized our collective power. And right now, we have the ability to do just the same. NZUSA was founded 91 years ago. And in that 91 years, we have been involved in anti-Vietnam War campaigns. We have been involved in Springbok campaigns. And if you look at the demographics of people who fought on the front lines, they were students. They were people who said, we have the power to change our society forever. And so I really want to encourage students, although it sometimes feels like it's so scary, like signing a petition or writing a letter or doing something, by coming together, we break down those barriers of fear. And it's so much easier when we do it with our neighbor, or we do it with our friend, or if we do it over Zoom, or we do it in person. We have the power to come together. And right now there is so much potential to change. So think, you as an individual have power, but when we come together, that power is so much larger than the sum of all those individuals. So just trying to, we have the ability to really reshape our history books as students before I have.
He wahine toa, just incredible. You are just an incredible leader, Izzy, and thank you for that whakaaro. It makes me want to go and roll just so I can be represented by you. Seriously, honestly, incredible work. Thank you all so much. I'm glad that people can go and listen to this kōrero and be inspired and motivated and know that the leaders that are representing our voices are you guys. Like, you guys are just hearty as, and I can't wait to see the awesome mahi that you do over the year. That's the end of our kōrero for the evening. You know how to get in touch with these people. You know how to support their kōrero. You know how to support the kaupapa. I encourage you to do so. I'm going to close us off with a karakia. I was supposed to begin with one, but all of the dramas of the technical glitches prevented that. But I think that was a sign because I didn't do a karakia. So my bad. I'm not going to make the same mistake again. So me noi tātou. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua, I te ara takatū. Koia rai rongo, whakairea aki ki runga, kia wātia, ai rā, kua wātia, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Tam.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Tam.
Time to get do my assignment.
You guys don't have to go right now. No, he's just doing the live off. How do I stop the live?
To the live.
Oh man.
Not a Zoom student. No,
Happy Mother's Day, Mum. I love you.
Is it Mother's Day?